I'm Alan Minsky. The show is Building a Powerful Left in the United States. Earlier today, I spoke with Cornell West at his hotel in Los Angeles. Cornell West is a professor at Princeton University. He's the author of countless books, including the classic Race Matters. He is co-host of the nationally syndicated radio show Smiley and West, and he is one of contemporary America's leading public intellectuals. We're 3 years into the most intense economic crisis that we have seen in our lifetime. The economy and the society in many respects is clearly organized, and I think there's a general consciousness of this now, to the benefit of the few versus the welfare of the many. Classically, this would be an environment where a political left would flourish, and yet it seems that there's no coherent, powerful left in the United States. Your assessment of the political left in the United States?
Well, first, I'm just blessed to be here. Appreciate you putting on this wonderful series, though. But no, it's very clear that we've got financial oligarchs, we've got corporate plutocrats who have a disproportionate amount of influence, not just in government. They don't just colonize Congress. They don't just shape White House policies, but they shape media. So what they have been successful in doing in the last 35 or 40 years is, as they deify Reagan, they demonize the left. They make it difficult for everyday people to gain access to any of the visions and the analysis, let alone the practices that the left enacts. So very few people even know about left organizations. Very few people know about the grassroots organizing that's going on, a left-wing trade unionists or prophetic mosques, prophetic synagogues, prophetic churches, and so forth. We've been pushed so radically to the periphery and the margins that it's as if we're not just un-American, that we're relatively impotent, powerless, and have little to offer. But that's a lie. But that has to do with unbelievable, unprecedented oligarchic and plutocratic influence, power, owing to not just the monies and resources, the wealth inequality and so forth, but to making available to everyday people alternatives to the present. And so we see the weapons of mass distraction, we see the obsession with surface issues, with superficial frameworks to understand the issues, and so everyday people feel what? Powerless, hopeless, hapless, and locked into instant gratification, fleeting pleasures, titillation of television, knowing that the whole system is rigged toward oligarchs and plutocrats against the demos, but feeling they can do very, very little. And then, of course, we also have a lot of deep divisions on the left as relatively weak at the moment as we are. But, I think we learned from Egypt, we learned from Tunisia that it's unpredictable when the demos wants to straighten its back up. And those of us who are committed to justice for poor people and working people, that we have to be there when the demo straightens its back up. It would be a marvelous thing to see the wave of massive demonstrations in Los Angeles, Chicago, against the White House, San Francisco, as we see in Liberation Square in Cairo. So we don't need to be too dark that trumps all possibility. We just have to continue to bear witness. We have to continue to tell the truth and recognize at the moment we're on the margin, no doubt about that. But the house of cards will fall and chickens come home to roost. You're going to reap what you sow. No lie lives forever.
It is an opening because right now the awareness that the system of American society is not functioning optimally and seemingly in reverse. From you to the American people, reintroducing the idea of what we call a left, but a politics that represents the interests of the vast majority of people?
First and foremost, we have to have the stress on the connection between the democracy deficit has something to do with the courage deficit, and it has something to do with the justice deficit. I'd call it a love deficit, which means what? Which means you have to have the courage to tell everyday people the truth, and when they hear that truth, they say, at least there's some people out there who have the courage to tell the truth, who are willing to try to bear witness to that truth, and that kind of witness can become contagious under certain circumstances. Those circumstances don't hold at the present, but they didn't hold 3 weeks ago in Egypt either, you see. It didn't hold 3 weeks ago in Tunisia or Yemen. And any time the demo straightens his back up anywhere in the world, it becomes contagious. Now, there is a rich democratic tradition within the American empire that we represent. So we have to convince our everyday people, when you think of America, think of a noble experiment in democracy that's profoundly flawed by oligarchic and plutocratic rule, and think of an empire with 800 military bases, a ship in every ocean, a military budget that's more than the combined military budgets of every other country in the world. That's the country we live in. That's the empire we live in. And more we need to say that. That's what I say everywhere I go. And it is catching on. It's getting traction. Ralph Nader, of course, has been the great figure in public life to do this kind of thing. And Noam Chomsky is, of course, the greatest public intellectual of our day. Thank God that there's a number of persons who still, like yourself and others, bear witness to this through media. And we just continually do our work, and when chickens come home to roost, we are ready to move in and say, you know what, poor people, you know what, working people, we never gave up on you. Look at the oligarchs and the plutocrats now. They are revealed for what they are, what they really are, which is driven by the greed, no real commitment to public interest, no commitment to common good, obsessed with their profits.
Since the financial crisis of 2007 and 2008, there has been a response from the populist right that, for the people participating in it, see it as opposed to Wall Street, or for many of the participants. What would you say to people in the general society in terms of economic policy? If you look at the long history of the left has been able to succeed over the past few centuries saying, we represent greater prosperity for the vast majority of people. We represent greater liberty. So in terms of the broad message, and in particular a focus on economics, how would you present the idea of participating? Come on over here to the progressive left where we are and participate in this movement, because we will bring you economic justice.
Well, I mean, one is we had to shatter the stereotypes that are bombarding fellow citizens in terms of who we are as progressives, who we are as a left. That actually we are not the freedom-hating, democracy-subverting crowd that you hear, not just on Glenn Beck and Company, but actually on a lot of mainstream media as well. So that at least people are able to gain access to what our visions actually are, what our analysis actually are, and the kinds of work that we do. Now we have to keep in mind, the trade union movement put in a lot of people on the street. Not a lot of focus on that. I mean, John Stewart's marches can get more focused than trade union marches. You see what I mean? Same would be true in terms of the march against the Koch brothers the other day. Not a whole lot of talk about that, but there are, in fact, activist groups out there that are doing things. It was just at the Tea Party, owing to their tie to corporate elites, going to their tie to Wall Street, big money, Fox News and other organizations giving them a lot of play. They began as an inchoate group. They weren't that powerful. It was a surface group. They gained prominence and presence because of corporate media presence. And lo and behold, people begin to think, oh, God, they're really something. They've got something going on. Next thing you know, it begins to take on a real momentum. So we cannot downplay the role of corporate media in terms of projecting certain images that actually are far beyond what the reality was. Now, of course, the Tea Party movement is in some ways a classic right-wing populist movement, which is to say that they talk about the corruption of the government. They're right about that. The government is corrupt. There's no doubt about that. Their response is typical conservative and right-wing, which is anti-government, but they're not really anti-government. They are pro-military in ways that go beyond even Reagan in that regard. Even in terms of certain social programs, given the fact that the age profile of so many in the Tea Party movement. They're not against Medicare. I mean, so that they're very selective. You see, they're not anti-government in terms of the carceral Marshall Plan and the penal Marshall Plan of the expansion of jails and prisons and the criminal justice system having big money. No, not at all. They don't sound too libertarian when it comes to that. Not at all. So if you look at the military-industrial complex and the prison-industrial complex, which are always the two litmus tests for serious libertarians, no, they're very pro. Well, that's pro-government. That's pro-big public money. It's just that it's against certain folk. Poor people, working people, disproportionately people of color, and so on, you see. Same would be true in terms of gay brothers and lesbian sisters. They believe the government ought to intervene into their lives, keep track of what they're doing in the bedroom. I thought they were libertarian. No, the hypocrisy begins to surface, you see. What we have to do is distill the thunder from the right-wing populists. There are people in the Tea Party movement who hate the bailout of investment banks. I do too. I'm in solidarity with those folks. It's just that it's expressed in a right-wing xenophobic way. How do we still the thunder and get them to see that what we're talking about is corruption in government? Yes, agree with you. Anti-government? No. Democratizing government? Yes. For poor and working people, first and foremost? Yes. Oh, we see. We want to cut back on military-industrial complex. We don't want an empire, right? We want a democratic republic. We want to be a nation among nations. Well, that's hard for them to take because the American exceptionalism is very deep. Very deep. Well, we got to tell them the truth. American exceptionalism is, in fact, a house of cards. It's a house of cards. That America is a nation and democratic and free to the degree to which citizens are courageous enough to fight for freedom and keep it democratic and expanded democracy. There's no special relation with God, no special relation to some providence and so forth and so on. It will go under like any other empire if we don't fight to keep it free and democratic.
I know for years you've been involved with the Democratic Socialists of America. A vision of society in terms of equity that you think would be a vision that could be accepted if articulated clearly for the American people, how that relates to issues like household welfare, education, healthcare.
Well, one is that first, if we begin with the notion that big finance and big business have thoroughly captured big government, then for me the question is, how do you empower poor and working people by, on the one hand, downsizing big finance and streamlining government to such a degree that government intervenes first and foremost to protect citizens and high priority of protecting poor and working citizens, the weak and the vulnerable. So that I actually have deep decentralizing tendencies that resonate with many of the fellow citizens who in no way consider themselves leftists. You see, I have a suspicion of bigness because it makes it difficult to set in place mechanisms of accountability for poor and working people, you see. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is they can't be too big to fail. Too big to fail really means too much political influence, and therefore they get what they want, or too little to rescue working people's, poor people's. So priority must be on what? Schools, jobs with a living wage, quality housing, and trying to create a context of a culture that's not so obsessed with titillation and stimulation and instant gratification and fleeting pleasures, but really talking about joy, talking about finding joy in community, talking about finding joy in working with others and serving others. So you also have a cultural and psychic and spiritual dimension that needs to be put forward, because I think a lot of people are very upset with the kind of spiritual malnutrition of late capitalist society, the kind of moral constipation of late capitalist society. They want to see a certain wholeness in terms of persons who are concerned with others and not just obsessed with themselves. They want to see some alternatives. Instead of the narcissism and the hedonism, they want to see much more sense of connection with others, empathy with others, those things that make us human at our best.
In American political discourse, spirituality in many respects has been ceded to the right. And your sense of how, given the makeup of the left, the strong strains of secular humanism that exist within the left, how that territory should not be or might not be ceded anymore to the right in the near future.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when you look at three towering figures of the 20th century, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, Dorothy Day, Martin Luther King Jr., what was distinctive about each one of them? They knew there had to be a prophetic spirituality, not tied to institutions of religion per se, but a spirituality, a way of being in the world that focused on non-market values in a market-driven society. So that the non-market values of trust, of love, of loyalty, of justice, of fairness, all of those fly in the face of buying, selling, making, mending, manipulation, strategizing, Machiavellian calculation, and philosophic preoccupation. And I think Brother Michael Lerner has been very good on this. He's somebody we have to take very seriously in terms of understanding what a progressive spirituality, a prophetic spirituality. It has to be ecumenical, because we know that our agnostic and atheistic brothers and sisters have been indispensable, have been fundamental in putting their lives and their bodies on the line in that regard. But at the same time, you got all these religious folk in the society, and they need to have access to a conception of themselves that's compatible with their religious beliefs, but also moves them in prophetic direction. Martin King understood this. Dorothy Day, of course, with the Catholic Workers Movement, understood this, and Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel understood it.
Because of what you just spoke about in terms of what I think is a very strong strain in the American polity of suspicion of bigness. But one of the ideas that is bandied about across the series, given the crisis of employment in the society, the sense that going forward, current American capitalism cannot provide full employment, the traction that could possibly be achieved by putting forward public works as a full employment strategy. And your thoughts on that, and then maybe some ideas, because these have also been bandied about ways that these can be put forward, but have a lot of local control and a lot more democratic control.
Exactly. Now, I think that even a progressive liberal like Brother Paul Krugman has been good on this. Joseph Stiglitz has been good on this, which is to say that it's possible to have a Marshall Plan tied to public sphere jobs, building infrastructure and so forth. Mm-hmm. You can have a localized form that express, but it's still public, and it's still the government. And I'm still very much for government doing big things. But on the one hand, you can do that, and you can then streamline or trim big government when it comes to the military budget. We can talk. They're already talking $1 trillion that can be shared. I think even more can be shared. That's money that could be used for other socially oriented purposes. So that when I talk about decentralization, I still recognize that certain kinds of centralization are here to stay. It's just a matter of trying to limit them as much as possible and to keep local autonomy and keep people's accountability at the center.
Cornell West, thank you so much for joining us on Building a Powerful Left in the United States.
Thank you so very much. Stay strong. Keep up the good work, though, brother.